Hey everyone, this is Judy Walgren. I'm the editorial director for ViewFind.com and also our app, which is in the App Store. Go check it out, please. We're the go-to platform for visual storytelling. I want to welcome you all to our third free webinar on pricing and negotiation led by expert Judy Herrmann. I want you to know that we record these sessions and you can review this one and the other two previous sessions on our Medium page. I'm going to pass the meeting now to our lead photo editor, Andrea Wise, who will introduce our presenter again, Judy Herrmann, and thank everyone for supporting us in photojournalism and visual storytelling. Andrea?
Thank you, Judy. Hi, everyone. I'm Andrea Wise. I'm the lead photo editor at ViewFind. It's probably redundant to say, but if you can hear me and you can see Judy Herrmann's slides, then you're in good shape. This is our third webinar. Our next webinar is going to be on May 11th, and it's going to be with the Customer Relations Management software, 17 Hats. And they're going to be talking about how you can use a photographer-specific CRM to manage your contact relationships and client contact information. So we'll talk about everything on the business side of client interactions, including invoicing, scheduling, email integration. It'll be really useful. But today's webinar is with none other than Judy Herrmann of Herrmann & Stark. Judy offers inspiring seminars on smart business practices that have helped thousands of photographers compete more effectively through one-on-one consultations and her consulting site, 2goodthings.com, with the number 2, not spelled out. She helps people grow creatively and financially rewarding businesses. A past national president of ASMP, an Olympus visionary, and a recipient of the United Nations IPC Leadership Award, Judy created, produced, and hosted ASMP's popular Business as Unusual webinar series for over 3 years. Small Wonder Rangefinder magazine named her one of 11 photographers you should know. Judy is currently busy interviewing photographers and buyers around the United States for an upcoming online course that will help photographers price their work and get paid what they're worth. So you guys have a free peek into Judy's brain today, but you can learn more about what she does and what she can't fit into just 1 hour on 2goodthings.com. So now I'm going to turn it over to Judy. Thank you so much.
So, wow, it is really great to be here, and thank you all so much for joining me. And Judy, Andrea, Tara, everyone at ViewFind, thank you so much for having me on your program. It's really exciting. So, obviously, pricing is a huge topic, and we only have an hour, including Q&A. So, this is going to be more of an overview, but I'm trying to make it as meaty as I possibly can given the time constraints. Now, in putting together this program, I made the assumption that all of you are pretty familiar with the photo industry and that you're going to recognize common industry terms, that you know the difference between stock and assignments, that you know what an art buyer is and does, that you're familiar with usage and licensing, that kind of a thing. So we are planning to run the Q&A at the end, but I am going to make one exception to that. So if I use a term that you're not familiar with, do me a favor and just post a note in the chat, and I'm going to ask Andrea to keep an eye out and interrupt me if I need to define anything, because I don't want anyone not being able to kind of follow along because they're, unfamiliar with a term. So let's dig in. First, I think it's important to acknowledge that right now, today, nearly everyone in our industry is struggling with pricing. I'm going to show you some quotes that come from a series of interviews that I conducted recently with photographers who've been in business anywhere from 1 year to over 35 years. And if any of these quotes resonate with you, I would love to know. Just put a little note in the chat box, and you can send it to me privately if you'd rather stay anonymous. So why is it so difficult? Now, part of the problem is that the traditional business models from the pre-digital, pre-internet days have broken down, and nothing has really replaced them. Plus, there's no standardization, no one-size-fits-all answers. Everything's custom, right? And while there's some information published about super big budget projects, there's not a lot about the kind of smaller shoots that most of us are working on day in and day out. So that's why I decided to build this online pricing course that will incorporate research and data from a lot of different photographers and clients about what's working in today's market. And I would love to interview anyone watching this webinar about your pricing pain points and challenges so that I can make sure that the course I design addresses everyone's needs. So if you are willing to be interviewed, or if you're just interested in learning when the course is finished, please go to twogoodthings.com/viewfind to sign up. So looking at the chat, it does look like everyone is doing well and following along, so that is awesome. Okay, so it may be small comfort, but at least you know you're not alone. So let's look at what we can do in the time that we have together to make things a little easier for you. Okay. There are basically two things that you have to understand in order to price your work. First, since profitability is the whole point of being in business, you have to know when you're making money and when you're losing money. You really have to know how much it costs you just to wake up in the morning. Now, to be clear, that number is not your price. It's not your day rate. It's just your bottom line. That number means that if you're earning less, you're losing money. You're literally paying the client to have you work on their stuff. Now, there may be times when it actually makes sense to do that, but you want to be making that decision consciously, and you want to do that only when there's enough non-monetary compensation to make it worthwhile. And if you make that decision too often, that decision to work for less than what it's going to take to meet your bottom line number, if you do that too often, you could find yourself facing bankruptcy. So you have to know your break-even point. But just knowing your break-even point isn't enough. You also need a sense of the true market value of the project, or what the market will bear. Now, think of that as being sort of the maximum fee that a client might be willing to pay for a project. And the difference between your break-even point and what the market will bear is where you start to really make money. Now, calculating your break-even point is fairly straightforward, and there are two tools that can help you do this. If you've never done a cost of doing business analysis, or if you've tried to do it unsuccessfully, or if you've done it but it just wasn't useful, I'd love for you to post something in the chat. And again, you can send it to me privately if you wish. Now, I am going to talk you through my approach to cost of doing business analysis because it is a little bit different from how it's usually done or kind of outlined in our industry. So let's go through this. For starters, your cost of doing business calculation needs to include everything that you spend money on, plus everything that you'll need to spend money on in order to realize your career goals. So let's start with non-reimbursable expenses. So this is basically the same thing as your overhead. This is going to cover all the money that you spend that you can't bill through to your client. Plus, I really strongly recommend that you include the money that you're going to need to spend in order to move your business forward. Things like investing in new equipment, in marketing materials, in additional training, that kind of stuff. It's really smart to spend some time thinking about how much money your business is going to need to be able to set aside in order for you to achieve your career goals, and then include that number in your total, not just what you're currently spending, but also what you're going to need to spend in order to move to a better place. Then there's what you need to live on. And that needs to include everything it takes to pay your personal bills, plus things like insurance and taxes and savings, because you're going to have future personal needs. At some point, you're going to need to buy a new car or buy a house or save for a child's college or, God willing, retire, right? So you want to take all that money and you want to add it up, and you're going to get a chunk of money. And in this example, we've got a photographer who's spending around $25,000 per year on business expenses and wants to earn $60,000 as their salary for a total annual kind of, I need to make $85,000. Now that $85,000 represents the minimum amount of money that this photographer has to generate in a year. If this photographer earns less, she's in trouble. In a best case scenario, she can't invest in her business and is delaying her ability to pursue her vision of success and isn't saving money for her personal needs, right? Worst case scenario, she's actively losing money and will ultimately have to shut her business down. Now, the next step that most people in our industry advocate is to calculate the number of jobs that you think you're going to get in a year, and then divide that annual chunk of money by the number of billable days that you think you're going to get in order to establish a minimum billable rate. But most of us have no idea how many billable days we're likely to get per year. And most of us also work on a range of projects that come in at different price points. So I prefer to use a spreadsheet that I created to do this kind of financial projection instead. So I'm going to cut over and show you this spreadsheet, and hopefully it will come through. So let's look at how this works. The spreadsheet has columns that allow you to enter different kinds of projects that you do. So here you would put your best guess of how many of these different kinds of projects you think you might get in a year. And then you're going to put in the average fee that you might get for these kinds of projects in the next column. If these projects come with any non-reimbursable expenses, right? We're not putting reimbursable expenses into this because, basically you're just passing those through your business, right? Like you pay for something, you charge your client for it, they pay you back, it's a wash, right? So these fees that we're putting in are what you actually keep, right? That you actually get paid. That's not stuff you're passing through the client. The non-reimbursable expenses are things that you don't actually get reimbursed for by the client. And then this column just subtracts the non-reimbursable expenses from the fees to give you your total net, like what you actually keep. Now, I want to be very clear that I made all the numbers in this spreadsheet up. I just randomly put in, $50 for a newspaper assignment with an average of $5 in non-reimbursable expenses for things like gas and parking. And I've put, 15 of them per month, which gives us 170 per year as a starting point. Then I've got 3 magazine assignments per month at $450 with, $25 in non-reimbursable expenses. And I've got, again, 3 corporate event shoots per month with a little bit of expenses. And then I'm kind of throwing in there 1 corporate shoot and 1 industrial shoot per day where the client covers all of the expenses, so there are no non-reimbursables. And again, these are just random made-up numbers. Now, where the spreadsheet's really helpful is it lets you see what happens if you charge less, what happens if you negotiate to get your expenses covered, or what happens if you're able to land more corporate and industrial jobs instead of newspaper and magazine assignments. So, for example, let's say that our fictional photographer decides that they're going to market heavily to corporate clients and they land 15 assignments instead of 12. So you can see that that means that they're making nearly $5,000 more than they were before. And that lets this photographer cut 100 newspaper assignments and still make more or less the same amount of money. So playing around with numbers in this way can really help you figure out how much work you really need to land at these different price points in order to meet your financial goals. And you can use it to track where you are over the course of the year or to play around with different kinds of projections for future earnings. So let's cut back over to the keynote. Now, you can build your own version of the spreadsheet yourself, or if you go ahead and sign up at the twogoodthings.com/viewfind address, I'll send you a link to download my version of the spreadsheet that you can just go ahead and use. And it's free. Don't worry that I'm going to charge you or anything like that. And again, I just want to reiterate that the numbers and the quantities that I put into that spreadsheet, they're totally made up and fictional. So I don't want you thinking like, oh, I should be expecting to get $1,200, $1,500 assignments a year or anything along those lines. I just kind of made the numbers work to get us to that $85,000 point. Okay, so the other thing that can be very helpful is to use this kind of tool, the cost of doing business analysis and the spreadsheet tool, to figure out whether your business is really financially viable. You know, you have to know whether you can realistically get enough work at the price points you're charging in order to cover your cost of doing business number. And if not, if you find that when you actually track what you charge and you realize like, oh my God, in order to cover my cost of doing business number, I would need to be shooting, 3 days a week, and like I have to do post-production, I have to do marketing, I have to do, calls with clients. There's like so much other stuff that I have to do. There's no way I can physically get that much work done. If you realize that like this isn't going to work, like there's no way I'm going to land enough jobs, there's no way I'm going to be able to do the work, I can't make this viable, then you can use the spreadsheet to help you figure out what to do to fix that. So, for example, you could say to yourself, okay, like what if I raise my prices? The spreadsheet can help you see the impact that raising your prices will have. You just change the numbers in the fees column, and you see how that affects the total number of jobs that you have to do to reach your financial goal for the year. So cutting back to the Excel document, let's just say that instead of charging $750 for a corporate event, you decide to charge $800. And let's say that you're able to talk them into covering all expenses so you no longer have any non-reimbursed expenses. And let's say that you raise your corporate rate from $1,500 to $1,650. Right? So once again now, you've just generated an extra $5,000 in income that lets you cut your newspaper assignments even farther. Right? So again, it's just a tool for letting you kind of play around with like, okay, well, what if this changes? What if that changes? What impact is that going to have? So as an alternative to raising prices, oh, you know what? Actually, let me go back to raising prices. There's one more thing that I want to say about that. Raising prices can always be a little touchy. The easiest way to do it is to start by quoting higher prices when new clients call. And then once you have enough new clients at the higher fees, you can pick the clients that you can afford to lose or the ones you like the least and let them know that you'll be raising your fees. I really strongly recommend that you don't stick people with your higher fees when they call you for a job where they're expecting to pay the same as last time, because that's going to leave them feeling pretty, under the gun. So just send a polite email or call ahead of time and let them know that your prices will be increasing effective such and such a date, and that way you haven't burned any bridges. I've also known photographers who have just raised their prices across the board and who swear that they've made enough money off the clients they've kept to make up for the clients they lost. It's a little riskier, but that's also an option. Okay, so now as an alternative to raising prices, there may be some products or services that you can add that will let you either attract new clients or pull more income from your existing clients. And if so, the spreadsheet will let you adjust your financial goal to cover the costs of ramping them up, and then let you see how much more work you need to attract in order to justify that expense. You might also think about shifting your marketing to pull in clients from a larger geographical area. And again, the spreadsheet can help you map out the investment, right, how much you're going to spend, and what you need to bring in from those new clients to cover it. The most important thing in all of this is to just know whether you're building a viable business. You know, at the end of the year, are your numbers going to add up? And if you aren't, you need to be able to figure out exactly what has to change to make it viable. So now we have a way to calculate the minimum you can charge without losing money, and we need to look at the other side of the equation, the market value of your work. Understanding what the market will bear is the only way that you can avoid leaving money on the table by pricing too low or lose jobs because you've quoted too high. And what the market will bear is going to hinge on two key factors. First, there's the value that you yourself bring to the table. And then there's the value that the client places on the project itself. So let's look at both of these things. We'll start by looking at your value. There are a lot of things that can play into how much value you command in the marketplace, and it's not just the quality of your work as a photographer would define it. Your market value includes things like having a unique and cohesive vision that captures the zeitgeist of the times. The services that you offer, including any specialized skills or equipment that you might have. Your cachet and your reputation, how you're positioned relative to your direct competitors, how working with you reflects on the client's own cachet and reputation, how clients feel about the experience that you deliver, how well you treat them, how much you cater to them, the confidence that you give your clients that you know what you're doing, that you'll always have a plan B, and that you will get the shot no matter what happens. Their trust in you, their trust in your team, in your professionalism, how much of their fear or anxiety you're able to take away. The rapport that you're able to build with your clients or with the subjects, right? If subjects love you, that reflects well on the agency or on the client. And finally, even your own audience can come into play. You know, with the changes in how advertising and promotion work today, attention is really scarce. Attention is the most priceless commodity that brands can get, or publications can get. And brands and publications are scrambling for audience. And more I am seeing them going to photographers who themselves have attracted large audiences as a way of gaining reach. So the point of all of this, Tim, is just to make it clear, it's not just about your photography. It's about all this stuff too. And all of this stuff comes into play, sometimes consciously, sometimes subconsciously, when your client decides who to hire. So when you're negotiating with your client, you want to make sure that they're aware of all the wonderful attributes that you have above and beyond your excellent work. Now, if the client wants you because of the value that you bring to the table, you're in a way better negotiating position and you can push for a higher price. If, however, the client is just looking for a camera with a heartbeat, then you are most likely competing on price rather than your value. Now, the other piece of the puzzle is the inherent value of the project to your client. And there are several factors that play into this equation. In general, the more people who are going to see the image, or the greater the return on investment that the image provides to the client, the higher its value. But you need to understand how usage comes into play in today's market. Rather than licensing, say, a single insertion, a single publication, or a print run limited to X number of thousands of copies, more and more clients are demanding unlimited usage. So usage fees tend to be implicit rather than explicit. In other words, it will still usually cost a local store less to license an image for unlimited usage than a national chain would pay to license an identical usage, because we assume that the national chain is going to give the image greater exposure. So unlimited usage doesn't necessarily mean the same thing to every client or every job you're likely to do. Now, even though unlimited usage is becoming more and more of the norm, most of the photographers that I talk to are telling me that they can still hold the line on first-party use, so that they're able to say it's just unlimited first-party usage, which means that the client can't relicense the image to other people. Any relicensing fees come back to the photographer rather than going to the client. And unlimited usage can also be limited in other ways. You can negotiate non-exclusive use so that you have the ability to still license the image to other buyers. You can limit the unlimited use by geography, so it's unlimited local use or unlimited regional use or unlimited national use. It can often be restricted to a specific industry, unlimited use within, say, the financial services sector. Or you can often restrict it to a specific media. So it might be unlimited PR, website, and social media use with no paid advertising. And it can frequently be restricted by time, unlimited use for 1 year, 2 years, or 5 years. Now, the uniqueness of the image also comes into play. The more unique the image, the harder it is to create or find something similar, the higher the value tends to be. Uniqueness reduces the competition. Fewer people can produce the image, so the ones who can command a higher rate. That being said, if it's a low priority project, they just need to fill a box, it's not a key branding image, then they're not going to spend a ton of money no matter how great a job that you would do on it. If they can get it from a stock library and they don't have a strong reason for using a custom image, if it's something like it's widely or easily available, then they're not likely to pay more than what a stock agency would charge. The tier of the market that the client works in can also sometimes play a significant role. So a global consumer company like Nike has different expectations than a small local client and is often willing to pay a higher rate to get those expectations met. A $20,000 wedding client has different expectations than a $2,500 one. The key here, again, is value. They're paying more because they expect to get more. Sometimes the geographical location of the client can play a role as well. Clients living in New York City or Silicon Valley may have different expectations than clients in, say, Omaha, Nebraska. Plus, what $1,000 can buy in their local market can affect their perception of what things should cost. Now, that being said, if you're in a remote location where there aren't a million highly skilled professional photographers and they need a shot near you, that can add value, especially if their only option is to fly someone in. So the most important thing, again, is to understand the client's expectations. It's smart to ask if they have a budget in mind. Most clients will say no because they're afraid that if they give you a number, you're going to charge them more than you would have if you had to come up with the number yourself. So you have to interview the client and listen carefully to their answers. You have to read between the lines of what they're saying. And one way to do this is to look at the production values and extrapolate. For the project, do they want a stylist on set? If yes, just hair and makeup or wardrobe and props too? If they tell you they want a different person to do hair and makeup and wardrobe and props, that tells you they've got really high expectations. If they say something like, oh, you can just bring some powder, can't you? You know, that tells you that they're really looking to scrimp and save, and that's going to be reflected in the fee that they're willing to pay for your services as well as the production side. You can ask if there's a budget for a producer. You know, is there a budget for a trailer for models to change in? If they're thinking the models can change in the bathroom at the McDonald's down the street, that tells you something. You can ask if we're hiring talent or shooting employees. If it's not about a specific employee and they're using their people in order to save money on talent, that also tells you something. So, you know, sometimes finding out the market tier of other vendors can be helpful. So, for example, if you're working with weddings, you know, finding out where the out-of-town guests are staying, who's making the cake, who's the wedding planner, if they even have one. All of these things give clues to expectations. And you're going to want to find other ways to gather information. I tend to use humor a lot. So I'll say things like, okay, so are we talking 5-star resort or Motel 6? And they'll laugh and they'll say something like, you know, more like a Marriott. And that gives me my ballpark. You know, sometimes just throwing out numbers that are extreme, like, you know, are you thinking $5,000 or $500? Will get them to say something like, oh, no, like $2,500 tops. So you have to find tools that will work with your personality. If you're not like a really, you know, kind of energetic person who jokes around a lot, those techniques aren't going to work for you. But the bottom line is that you want to try to get as much information as possible about the client's expectations and about what your clients value before you start putting your numbers together. If you're not sure what your clients value, what they worry about, what they want, what they need, you need to find out. You need to talk to people. Do a survey or conduct some informational interviews. Ask everyone you know who they know that might be willing to talk to you, and start asking questions. In terms of resources that will help you figure out like the actual numbers, you need to understand that no one can tell you what to charge. First, it's illegal, and second, there are too many variables. There's no standardization. There's no one-size-fits-all answers. You really have to immerse yourself in the numbers, and that's why I'm so focused on gathering data. Immersion is really the only way to accelerate the learning curve. And I'll be providing access to a lot of real-world numbers in this course that I'm building, but you can start by collecting pricing data wherever you come across it. So some resources that are worth looking at include trade associations. So there is an absolute alphabet soup of trade associations in our industry, and each one focuses on different demographics. So you're going to want to pick the one that makes the most sense to you. There are some very strict federal limitations governing the kinds of pricing information that trade associations can share. So don't expect to get numbers from the association itself. They are a great place, though, to meet and network with other photographers and to start building the kinds of relationships where those colleagues will feel safe and comfortable and like they can trust you and feel like they can talk candidly about their numbers with you. Rob Haggart's blog, aphotoeditor.com, includes a category called Pricing and Negotiating, where you'll find sample estimates and invoices along with details about various projects and the negotiations that have been provided by Wonderful Machine, which is an online searchable database of photographers' portfolios that also offers the kinds of services that a rep would provide only on an a la carte basis. And if you are asked to, so if you are asked to bid on a really large job where it's worth paying somebody to help you figure out what to charge, Wonderful Machine does offer that as an a la carte service. Every year, Michigan-based photographer and social media expert Ross Fillers posts a lengthy article about pricing on his blog. It's always called How Much Should Photographers Charge? Followed by the year. So, this year's is How Much Should Photographers Charge? 2016. And he usually provides a really good rundown on pricing structures and strategies, and including some number ranges that you can look at. Photo Shelter, which is a company that offers templated websites with tools that let you host and license your own stock imagery, has a really, really great blog. And they also include a category on pricing where they're sharing some stories about real-world projects that includes information about numbers and insights from the client side. And, just to be like full disclosure, I do not have a relationship with any of these groups other than being I'm a member of ASMP. So, I'm not shilling for them. I'm just trying to share some resources where you can get some good information. There's also a lot of online and print trade publications like Photo District News, F-Stoppers, Petapixel, et cetera, that will periodically publish articles about pricing. And sometimes when they're interviewing photographers or where they're writing an article on photographers, they'll mention like a little sidebar about pricing, even if it isn't the primary focus of the article. So I think it's really smart to keep an Evernote or a mind map or a spreadsheet, some kind of document where you start collecting the data that you come across about pricing so that you can start really building a picture of what the market will bear based on whatever real world numbers you're able to track down. Now, when it comes to presenting your price, you've got some choices. A lot of clients will just ask what your day rate is. And if that's how you need to go, that's fine. But in my opinion, charging by the day or by the hour just punishes you for becoming more skilled and more efficient. Let's say that you familiarize yourself with every assembly line in your city, and that means that you can get in and out super fast, so you're minimizing downtime on the line anytime you're going in there to shoot. That's worth way more money, not less. If you're such a good, portrait photographer that you can get in and capture a CEO or a celebrity's portrait in 10 minutes, that's worth more money, not less. Or let's say that you invest in really great equipment that allows you to spend less time on lighting or post-production. You've just spent money to be more efficient and should earn more, not less, as a result. So I advocate billing by the project or by the shot. I think it's much better for everyone. Your client gets a clear sense of what the project will really cost them, and there's no fighting over extra days or hours or what happens if you finish early. Do you get paid less? And you get a fair fee for the value that you're providing. If Fred got back from China early and they want you to shoot his portrait while you're here shooting the other 5 guys, if you are quoting on a per shot or a per project basis, then they know exactly what it's going to cost them to make that decision. If you go this route, I do think that it's still smart to list time parameters. So, for example, you might say 8 executive portraits captured in 2 consecutive days. So they don't think that you're going to work around a crazy schedule and come in like 8 different times to shoot those 8 different people. That being said, corporate events and weddings still make sense to quote on an hourly basis. So I strongly recommend setting a minimum fee so that they don't think that it's a straight prorated fee if they send you home early. I also think it's really smart if you are charging by the day or by the hour to always quote what you're going to charge if you go overtime and how many hours you consider a day to be, so that it's clear that it's going to cost extra if they ask you to stay longer. Now, more and more, I'm hearing clients asking for bids or offering flat fee pricing structures where the client pays the same amount no matter what happens. If you encounter that kind of a situation, I urge you to be cautious and make sure that you take into account all of the expenses that could come up in a worst case scenario. An event photographer I spoke with recently told me about a project where she was offered $2,000 to shoot a 3-hour event, which sounded great until she added up all the travel and assistance and the other costs that were going to be entailed in order to give them the level of service that they were looking for, and realized that at the end of that 3-hour event, she'd be keeping less than $300. It's also smart to provide your clients with estimates that have some flexibility built into them. Give them options that allow you to adjust the price up or down in response to their feedback. So you're not presenting it as a take it or leave it kind of scenario. Now, if you wind up lowering your price in response to your client saying, we need the budget to come down, I urge you, take something away. Give them fewer setups or fewer final retouched images or simpler production values, something. Don't leave your client with the impression that you actually did pull your numbers from thin air, that all they have to do to get more from you for the same dollar is push you harder. You really don't want to lose your credibility with your client in that way. There's also always a big debate over combining or separating creative and license fees when presenting your numbers. As with everything else, it depends on the client's expectations, but more and more I'm seeing it all bundled into a single fee. Now, that has almost always been true in smaller markets, and as more and more people move towards various flavors of unlimited usage, it's starting to become the norm in larger and higher end markets as well. So I had a conversation with Michael Bilbrey, who's the senior art producer at Leo Burnett, which I think it's like the 8th or 9th largest ad agency in the world. And he told me that he wants those numbers bundled into a single fee because it's easier to explain to their clients. Plus, he said, now that we're licensing broad rights, there's fewer of those, oh, we're not going to run the third insertion, can you come down kinds of negotiations now. So that trend is something that you'll want to be paying attention to. So before we wrap up and go to the Q&A, I want to spend a few minutes talking about some pricing and negotiating assumptions that a lot of photographers make that are just flat out wrong. A lot of clients these days have lawyers who have told them that they need to own the copyrights to their photography. This is usually presented in the form of a work-made-for-hire clause in the purchase order or contract, and sometimes it's presented as a copyright transfer. The only difference between these two things is that a work-made-for-hire agreement is executed before the work has been created, and a copyright transfer is executed after the work already exists. Both of these agreements must be presented in writing and signed. Now, a lot of photographers assume that work made for hire and copyright transfers are not negotiable. This isn't always the case, and it's smart to at least ask. Oftentimes it will turn out that the client's main concern is that they can't control how the images might get used by employees in the future, and they just don't want to get sued. They don't necessarily care about ownership or about you not being able to license the work to other people. They just don't want to get sued. In those situations, you can usually negotiate some form of an unlimited use license that allows you to keep your copyrights. Now, sometimes they'll be adamant that they need to own the copyright, and you're going to have to decide if the amount of money they're offering is worth giving up your copyrights and giving up any future income that those images might have generated for you. Now, along those same lines, clients will often ask for a buyout, and that term has no standardized meaning. It may mean that they want to own the copyright. It may mean they want unlimited usage. It might even just mean that they want to do whatever they need to do and they don't want to get sued. So always clarify exactly what clients mean when they say buyout, and see if you can design a license that will work for their needs while still protecting your interests as much as possible. Another area that I see photographers really hurting themselves is by accepting the first offer a client puts forward, particularly with editorial and corporate assignments. Don't assume that a publication or company is not willing to negotiate on their fees or that they are not willing to cover reasonable expenses. I am hearing from photographers who have been able to negotiate fees that were 1.5 or even 2 times the rate originally offered by the client, plus negotiate money for an assistant, for travel expenses, for rental fees on their own equipment on top of that. So there are companies and publications that will not negotiate, and your negotiating position is going to depend a lot on your value, as we talked about earlier. But you aren't going to know whether you're in a good negotiating position and whether the company is willing to negotiate unless you ask. I also want to urge you, don't assume that the reason that you didn't get a job is because your quote was too high. There are a million reasons that clients pick one photographer over another, and price is just one of them. The client might have a relationship with another photographer. The art director might want to work with a specific photographer because of the cachet that lends to their resume. Maybe someone else's treatment included an image that totally nailed the concept. Or maybe all of these photographers quoted more than you did and still got the job for some other reason. And even when price is the issue, there's no guarantee that the problem was that you were too high. Quoting too low is just as much of a reason for a client to walk away as a quote that is too high. I heard this great story years ago from a photographer who talked to the buyer at a major corporation about why they never used local photographers for their big, prestigious ad shoots. The buyer told him that she tried once. She got quotes from photographers in New York, Minneapolis, and Los Angeles, and she decided to give this one local photographer a shot because she saw something in his portfolio that she really thought was perfect for this job. Now, this was a big production job with a lot of expenses, and the three national photographers all came in within about $5,000 of each other on a total budget of around $95,000. The local guy, he came in at around $35,000. The buyer said that it was clear he just didn't understand what it took to produce a job for an ad campaign of this magnitude. The crazy part is that photographer probably thought that he lost the job because he was too high. So you really want to talk to people, talk to photographers, talk to clients. And that's what I'm doing in order to gather the data that I'm going to be sharing in my course. You really need a sense of what your competitors are charging, what your clients value, and what they consider to be a fair price for the services that you offer. From there, think hard about the unique value that you bring to the table and how you can increase the perceived value of your offerings in your client's mind. Look beyond your images. Look at all the different ways that you create value for your clients. And then hone your marketing, negotiation, and sales skills so that your full value comes through in every communication. Understand what your clients fear, what keeps them up at night, and show them how paying you a fair fee will keep their nightmares at bay. So that is the end of my spiel, and it looks like we've got a gazillion comments in Judy. Judy, I've been studiously ignoring.
Yeah, you do not have to read through all of those. I've been compiling them. So that was really fantastic. I'm sure everyone took a lot out of that, and we do have some questions for you. So first, if you don't mind going back and re-explaining the work for hire, copyright transfer, buyout, differentiation. We had a couple people in the chat ask specifically if you could explain that again.
Absolutely. So work made for hire is a specific agreement that is carved out in copyright law that essentially allows a company to treat you as an employee for the limited period of time that the agreement covers. And under a work made for hire agreement, if you sign a work made for hire agreement, the work that you produce under that agreement specifically, not all the work that you ever produce in your whole career, but just the work that you produce for that client that's covered under that agreement, the copyright automatically vests to the client. You are then not the copyright owner of that work that you created. You never were the copyright owner of that work that you created. The client owns the copyright from the moment you click the shutter and the work is fixed in tangible form. A copyright transfer is an agreement that clients will sometimes ask photographers to sign retroactively. With a copyright transfer, there wasn't a work made for hire agreement when you created the work, so the copyright automatically vested in you as the creator. And so now the client is coming back to you after the fact and saying, all right, we now want you to transfer your copyrights to this work to us so that we own the copyrights. Either way, whether it's through a work made for hire agreement or it's through a copyright transfer, if you sign away your copyrights and your client winds up owning those copyrights, you no longer have any rights to that work. That means that you have to get permission from your client to show that work in your portfolio. You have to get permission from your client to show that work on your website. You don't own it. It's not your copyright. So if you do, I actually should have mentioned this during the presentation, if you do sign a work made for hire or a copyright transfer agreement, it is really smart to carve out self-promotional rights. In other words, to have them license back to you self-promotional rights so that you can at least use the images to promote your services. And again, I'll be honest with you, I have personally never signed a work made for hire agreement, and I have never signed a copyright transfer agreement. If I was offered enough money, I would. But the scenarios in which clients have offered me these agreements, the amount of money that they were offering to pay was so small that I was just like, you know what, it's not worth it. I don't want to not own my copyrights. That has an emotional value to me that's greater than what this client is willing to pay. But that's a personal decision. That's not a decision that I'm going to force anyone else to abide by. Now, buyouts. The phrase buyout is a phrase that buyers will often use that has no recognized consistent meaning. In other words, different buyers mean different things when they say we need a buyout. So some buyers or clients, when they say, we're going to need a buyout on this, mean they want a work made for hire agreement or they want a copyright transfer. And some buyers, when they say we need a buyout on this, mean we want unlimited usage. And some buyers, when they say we need a buyout on this, don't actually know what that means, right? They might be perfectly satisfied with an extremely limited license. They've just heard someone else use the phrase. So anytime someone uses the phrase buyout, I think it's very important to find out what it is that they really mean by that. And then you can, kind of go from there and craft a license that makes the most sense.
Great. Thank you, Judy. Okay, so now another couple of questions. One of our webinar participants is a photographer working in London. Another is an Indian photographer, and they both asked a similar question, which has to do with clients who are either clients that are not covering travel and how to explain travel costs without alienating those clients, or when you're working with a client who is not located in your region and they pay local photographers less than they would pay an American photographer for the same work. How do you negotiate those market differences and make sure that you're not alienating your client?
Okay. So first, I'm just going to say that I think it's awesome that there are people tuning in from London and India, but what the situation you're describing happens in the United States. It happens everywhere, right? There's always clients that don't want to pay for travel. There's always clients that are willing to pay someone from far away more than they're willing to pay someone local, and so on and so forth. So, here's where proving your value comes into play, right? So if the client is just if you don't, take their offer, or if you say, I need more, if they're just going to go to the next guy, if they're just a bottom feeder and the only thing they care about is price, then there isn't a negotiation, right? Negotiations can only happen when both parties are willing to compromise their position. So you have to start with a client that, wants to work with you badly enough that they are willing to make an exception or to compromise. And in that kind of situation, you're going to want to really stress the value that you offer that makes it worth paying your travel expenses, or that makes it worth paying you more than they would pay someone local. So it's all a matter of really looking at the value proposition that you offer. And if you are solving the client's problems in ways that they can't get solved easily by someone cheaper, then they're going to be willing to pay more for that. And the client's problems might not be related to photography, right? The client's problems may be having someone who shows up on time, having someone who's reliable. It may be having someone who knows how to dress appropriately for, so that you're not kind of embarrassing them. It may be having someone who's so sensitive to the subject that the subject relaxes in ways that they wouldn't relax otherwise. Do you see what I'm saying? So it's, in a way, you're talking about a negotiation, but even more so, you're talking about a sales process of really making sure that you're making the value that you bring to the table so explicit that the client is going to say, this is crazy. I'm not going to pinch pennies. I want this person.
Great, thank you. So next, we have a couple of questions that have to do with contracts and the way that you set expectations before you either do the job, or even in the case of bidding on the job, before you even get the job. So one is how to prevent scope creep, signing a contract and then later having the client ask for additional things that cost you more money, take more time for you. How do you navigate those situations to make sure that that doesn't happen again in the future? And how detailed do you get in the expenses portion of your estimates to not scare away clients if there are too many numbers?
Okay, so I'm going to answer the second question first. Right? And don't let me forget the first question. So in terms of the amount of detail that you provide, I am hearing from more and more photographers that are presenting much more kind of lump sum estimates and not, like line iteming every paperclip, because they're finding that the clients just get overwhelmed by the numbers. It's too much, and it stresses them out, and it turns into too many opportunities for the client to say, well, do you really need those paperclips? So, it really depends. And again, you're going to have to suss out your client's expectations. And you can ask the client, how much detail do you need? Like, especially when you're in the early stages of a negotiation, one of the things that I'll often do is say, all right, well, let me pull together some ballpark numbers. I'm going to give you a range. And then if we're, in a place where that range makes sense to you, we can tighten it down at that point based on the different kinds of scenarios that we can do, right? Because there's a zillion ways to produce any photo shoot. So that's a way of kind of, gauging where you are without putting that insane amount of work into, laying out every single solitary detail. Now, with ad agencies, frequently they are working with cost consultants who do want that detailed breakdown, almost literally down to the paper clips. So you will find yourself, if you're working with ad agencies, often needing to provide very, very detailed breakdowns. But corporate direct, publications, I'm seeing more and more photographers that are, maybe listing all of the things like, I'm going to have an assistant, I'm going to, feed people, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, and it's, the production's going to cost this much and the fee is going to be this much, kind of a thing. Now, the other part of the question I've forgotten. It was contract,
setting,
right?
Yeah, contract setting the
expectations
expectations.
if the client wants you to do more. Okay. So, in a way, this ties in with what I was saying about like per shot or per project pricing rather than by the hour or by the day. Because usually if you say to someone, the project description is X number of executive portraits and it's going to cost you Y amount of money, they're usually smart enough to do the math and say, okay, well, if I divide the amount of money by the number of portraits, that gives me how much this is costing me per person. And if I add another person, it's going to cost me more. So that already kind of sets up that framework, or if you charge by the shot. Another thing that I've seen photographers starting to do is they'll kind of front load a fee. So they might say it costs this amount of money just to have me show up and set up. From there, I'm going to charge you X amount of money per person I shoot or per shot you have me do, and that's going to include one finished retouched file. And if you decide that you want additional retouched finished files from that same shoot or that same person or that scenario, then it's going to cost you this much money per additional finished retouched file. So, the main thing is that you just want to be spelling out as clearly as possible what it is that the client is going to get for their money. And the more clearly you spell that out, the easier it is for the client to immediately understand, without you even necessarily having to say something, that if the project description varies, it's going to cost a different amount. Now, I'm hearing a beep. I hope no one else is hearing that. I've checked, and it's not my phone, so hopefully it's not a problem.
Yeah, I hear that too, but I think we're still okay. So, they all hear it as well, but
I'm so sorry, guys.
No, it's okay. I don't know what that is actually. Okay, so next question, if you don't mind, this is the last question, and it has to do with
Sure.
how do you evaluate whether certain opportunities are worth taking or not? So examples being situations where publications, et cetera, offer, that you can get featured or to do something for exposure, and also competitions that charge a lot for portfolio reviews. How do you decide what is worth doing or not?
Okay, so we're talking about non-monetary compensation.
Exactly.
So, yeah, okay. So there's this graphic designer who, her name is Jessica Hische, or Hische. I think it's Hische, and if you do a Google search for her, along with the word "should I work for free," you'll find this fabulous flowchart that she made of about non-monetary compensation. So the way that I look at it is the non-monetary compensation that you're offered has to make up for the money that you're not getting. It has to be real, worthwhile, true compensation that has real value to you. So if there's